U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is putting his endorsement on Alberta separatism.
Alberta is a wealth of natural resources, but they won't let him build a pipeline to the Pacific. I think we should let them come down into the U.S., and Alberta is a natural partner for the U.S. They have great resources. The Albertans are very independent people. Rumored that they may have a referendum on whether they want to stay in Canada or not.
When asked whether he knew something about a possible referendum, here's what Secretary Bessent had to say.
Look, people are saying, people are talking. People are talking. People want sovereignty. They want what the U.S. has got.
Canada's finance minister pushed back today on the comments made by his U.S. counterpart.
I would say no, thanks, but no thanks. We will do our own things, and we will be able to develop our resources with Albertans, with Canadians, and that's something that will remind him next time I see him.
Naheed Nenshi is the leader of the Alberta NDP, and he joins me now. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks, JP. Thanks so much for having me.
So the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who is not a junior figure, just so we're clear, he holds one of the senior-most roles in the U.S. government. He's broadly responsible for the country's economy, right? He was cheering on the Alberta separatist movement. He says, I think we should let them come down and join the U.S. What do you say when you hear something like that from someone of his stature?
Look, this is a very serious issue. You cannot define this as Alberta separatism as some fringe movement. Don't worry about it. The referendum will fail. There are many, many things to unpack here. So before we get to the U.S., let's start by saying this is Danielle Smith's fault. Danielle Smith has been pandering to the separatists. She made it easier for the separatists to have a referendum when she was asked about it on her radio show last summer, rather than saying, well, we need to talk to separatists because we need a better deal with Ottawa. She straight up said, if I don't pander to my base, she didn't use those words, but if she said, if I don't make a deal with these separatists, I'm going to lose the next election. So now our country is at risk, is at very serious risk to try and save one politician's skin. This is not right. And we have every right to be deeply concerned about it at a time when the world is so fragile, when every single one of us needs to be on Team Canada, where people are worried about things at home like the cost of living and a collapsed healthcare system here in Alberta. We're talking about separatism. And what did we think was going to happen? The separatist leaders have bragged about their meetings in the United States with senior decision makers. So the ironic thing here is people who think the separatist talk is about independence, if they're successful, they may find themselves in a less independent Alberta than ever. And where are all those people who've been screaming about foreign interference for so long, screaming about foreign interference on the separatist side here?
Yeah, I want to ask you about that because Bessent explicitly mentioned the referendum. Like, he seems to be dialed in here. He has an idea of what's happening in your province. He says there's a referendum on this coming. I mean, are you concerned about that foreign interference that you're referring to? Because obviously one figure at the highest levels of American politics has an idea about a referendum. He says Alberta should join the United States. We don't really know where that could go. It could move beyond the rhetoric into, possibly some practical involvement in a campaign like that if there was a referendum on this.
Look, there's nothing secret about this. This is not a shock. The leaders of the independence movement have been bragging about their meetings that they're having, their high-level meetings, they call them, they've been having in the United States. And so this is a very real concern. We saw in recent by-elections in Alberta, the separatist movement having just a lot of funding and much more momentum than their actual results in those by-elections would show, which were very, very, very low. So where's the money coming from? Where's the support coming from? Where's the organizing coming from? I think it's fair to ask these questions. And quite frankly, I think the Premier needs to be asking these questions. If we really believe that we are all on Team Canada right now, we need to all be on Team Canada. And coddling the separatists is no way to do that.
I want to ask you, I take your point about how Premier Danielle Smith has sort of made it easier to have these referendums, and she has courted perhaps some folks that are associated with this independence movement. But we know that this kind of existed before her, right? And we can look at Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, our former leader, of course, who, many folks say is kind of the godfather of the Alberta independence movement, inadvertently, of course, because of some of his policies with respect to the energy sector. Bessent mentioned the pipeline in that interview as well today. He said that Canada is blocking Alberta from getting a pipeline to the Pacific. Of course, we know that that's really quite the opposite. The Prime Minister is actually promoting a pipeline that will run through BC to get our products to markets in Asia and beyond. But does it tell you that that pipeline is actually more important now than perhaps it's ever been? That supporting energy infrastructure is one way to sort of turn off this sort of American expansionism and annexationist threats, because that's how they're appealing to some of these independence-minded folks in your province by saying, hey, come join the United States. You can sell your oil and gas all you want. Does the Prime Minister have to redouble his focus on energy infrastructure as a result?
Look, there's a lot to untangle in that question. And let's start with, yes, we need the energy infrastructure. Yes, we need pipelines in all directions. Yes, we need to do so in a way that is thoughtful, that is environmentally responsible, that deals with the needs of First Nations and communities along the route. We were there. I had a front row seat when I was mayor of Calgary to the only pipeline that we built in generations to Tidewater, which is, of course, the Trans Mountain expansion. So, yes, we need all of that. And the stuff that the Prime Minister talks about in terms of reducing regulatory burden and so on is stuff we've been talking about, I've been talking about for years. And we need to see action on that to get stuff built in Canada. There is no question about that. But the second half of the question is where things get really muddled, which is, are we doing this because it's the right thing to do for the economy and for the environment? I think the answer is yes. Are we doing this to appease Danielle Smith and give her a political victory? I hope that's not why we're doing it. Because what we've learned over time is that you can't appease people like that. They will ask for more and more and more. And even Mr. Bessent's argument doesn't make a ton of sense because, of course, getting pipelines built right now is all about diversifying our oil and gas exports away from the United States. We've seen what happened when we put all our eggs in one basket, and that basket proved to be very fragile. And we've had a lot of that over the last year. So diversifying our exports is absolutely critical. We have to do so in a thoughtful, stable, smart way moving forward. I'm not seeing a lot of that right now, but I want to see it. I'm coming to Ottawa myself next week, and we'll have some conversations with some folks both on separatism and on the importance of building this energy infrastructure in all directions, but also in doing it right. So yes, let's get the pipelines built. We've got to do that. Let's not pretend that that's an answer entirely to the separatist issue, because the other part of your question was, yeah, separatism has been around for a long time. It varies. Sometimes it's 15%, sometimes it's 20, 25%. Some polls have put it as high as the high 20s in Alberta right now. But what's different now is the incredible emboldening of this group by the government. The government is asking anyone who wants a referendum to give them $25,000 to start, but the separatists only had to give $500.
Yeah.
So these are the things that we're seeing. The pro-Canada referendum had a short period of time to collect a large number of signatures. The separatists have a much longer period of time to collect a much smaller number of signatures. When you play with fire like this, it's going to burn you at some point, and that's really why we're in this situation.
Naheed Nenshi, leader of the Alberta NDP. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Great weekend. And everyone across Canada, stay warm. There's a cold one coming.